So, week 3 of my 30 Days Watercolor and Beyond challenge didn't exactly go as planned. Instead of one neat weekly video, I ended up skipping one, and now I have a mountain of mixed media experiments, and I get to share all of them with you in this video. Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. While I tell you a bit about why I didn't post a video last week, I'll let you watch the process of one of the paintings I did. So basically, there's two reasons why I ended up not making a video last week. If you remember, week 3 was supposed to be about traditional mixed media. I mean, combinations we often see, like ink and watercolor, or watercolor as a background, and layering pencils or oil crayons on top. But I didn't totally stick to this plan. I ended up making some paintings that fit more into week 2 and others that fit more into week 4. And secondly, I had a bit of a motivation dip and I didn't paint that much. Making the daily reels and the weekly YouTube videos takes a lot of time and energy. So I felt like I didn't really have much to share because I basically just made one artwork each day, and you could have already seen them all on my Instagram. But also, since they didn't quite fit the theme I had planned, I was at a loss as to what to make the video about. I considered making a video discussing all these difficulties and the ups and downs of art challenges, but ultimately I decided it would be better to give me a little break and instead use the gained energy to dive back into painting. And it totally helped. I felt more creative in this last week and I really enjoyed that time that I gained. And I'm also very glad to be able to share with you now one video with all of the mixed media, both traditional and some of the crazier experimental things I did. This video is gonna be packed full of so many different paintings. I'll show you first some of the more traditional mixed media methods you can use and the typical combinations we see. But then I'll also dive a lot into all the different material combination tests I did, and all the different kind of paintings I made using crazier techniques and combos you're not supposed to use and so on. I'm quite sure you will discover some new techniques and combinations that you haven't seen elsewhere before. Overall, I'm really happy I did this challenge. It definitely helped me to really explore my watercolor palette that I set up in the first week. There's absolutely no way I would have used it this much without the challenge. So it was really useful for that. But what was hard was that I basically gave myself the double challenge to do something outside of my comfort zone every day. For instance, only using watercolor in week 1, but at the same time share what I paint every day on social media. But I definitely learned a lot during this challenge about my own preferences when it comes to painting with watercolor, and about my watercolor palette and material combinations, which we'll dive into today. So let's get into this video, where I'll take you through all the mixed media experiments I tried, some more traditional like watercolor with ink, and some pretty unusual like watercolor with acrylic markers, charcoal or glue. I'll also share what I learned, what worked and what didn't, plus a quick reflection on my watercolor palette. And of course, as I did every week, I will reveal everything I've painted. Let's start with traditional mixed media. What I mean by that is just combinations that I see very often, that are very commonly used, also by me. I think there's 3: watercolor and ink, watercolor and pencil, and watercolor as background, or as a first layer, you could say. On the first day of the 3rd week, when I finally got to use mixed media, I used watercolor and my beloved brush pen with black ink. I feel really at ease with this technique. People use it a lot for people sketching, but it's also the traditional way to approach urban sketching. You'll often see people doing the sketches using ink pens, and then later adding watercolor to add color to the drawings. It's probably the most used combination for watercolor. So on this first day of week 3, I was just really happy to get back in my comfort zone for the day And I made these quick illustrations of 4 women with some fun fashion. I wanted it to look cohesive, like fashion illustrations of some designer's newest collection or something. They were supposed to be loose, so I tried to work quickly, and I'm quite content with how they turned out. Now, of course, watercolor and pencil was the entire theme of week 2. So if this is something you enjoy, I definitely recommend going back to watch that video afterwards. I just wanted to add it here again because, well, for once, it's a common way of mixing watercolor with other media, but also because I just couldn't help myself but make some more paintings like this in these last 2 weeks. And I want to share some of them with you. One that I think just turned out so cute is this dog I sketched while watching a Monkey Mintaka stream. I just painted a basic silhouette, paying attention to values and color shifts a bit while painting, and then just scribbling over it with different hues of beige and brown until I was happy. And we decided to call him Charlie. Isn't he so cute? Another day I was watching a live stream of Dylan Sarah, an artist who does weekly portrait drawing sessions. We had 10 minutes for each reference photo. My plan was to add watercolor to them, but sometimes I just ran out of time, and so I just left them as they were. The one I shared on Instagram already had some watercolor, but when I looked at it the next morning, I felt that it was lacking a bit of contrast. And did you notice? I also completely forgot one of the sleeves. So I added just a touch of Neocolors on top. In this one here, I actually started with watercolor, trying to focus on the darker areas and shadows, and I added the pencil lines afterwards. I think when combining pencils with watercolor, it's good to keep a few things in mind. 1. You don't have to start with the pencil. You can also start with color and then do the sketch on top of that. And 2. You don't have to color in everything. Sometimes it can be nice to use watercolor just to add some shadows or pops of color, as I did here in these sketches I made during a Patreon session with Victoria Semikina. Watercolor can sometimes feel like a really serious medium that you have to use in a professional way to make a full painting, but it can also just be fun and bright and be used in the same way you would use an oil crayon or marker, to add little color splashes here and there. When watercolor gets combined with multiple other media, it often gets used as a background. By that I mean that people use it for the first layer they put down on the page. And this makes sense for multiple reasons. Watercolor is often diluted and so pretty soft and transparent, which is what you want for background elements. If you want to create a scene with depth, you can't make every detail in the background pop out with equally strong color and contrast as the foreground elements. So making backgrounds blurry and less opaque works really well for dimension. Landscapes are an obvious example for this. You want the mountains in the back or the sky to be a bit subtle and soft. You can see here in this landscape I did that I left these small trees in the faraway background mostly in watercolor. I also left the original layer of the path in the foreground, only adding some rocks, dirt and texture to make it come alive, because this wasn't the focus. My main focus were the grass and trees in the middle ground, and you can see that this is where I added most of the strong colors, using acrylic markers, pencils and Neocolor tools. Another reason for using watercolor for the background is that you can always layer any material on top of watercolor, but not so much vice versa. Watercolor likes paper as a support. You can see here in this painting I did of a museum backyard that I started with a very basic watercolor painting that looks kind of ugly by itself. I added the beautiful tree shadows in a second watercolor layer, but everything else got very much covered by pencil and Neocolors. So I suppose the idea is to use watercolor to its strengths and let the other materials do their own job, which is, for example, to be bright, to be opaque, and to layer well. If you try to layer watercolor on top of other materials or supports, it behaves in strange ways. And actually, this is the perfect segue into the next section, you guys. This was not planned. One day, I decided to just make texture experiments instead of my daily painting. This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. To just have some cards where I try all kinds of material combinations. And then I can use my favorites to pin on the wall and have a sort of texture library. And this way, when I'm out of ideas on how to realize something, I can just look at them and pick the most suitable for my current needs. Anyway, so I cut some mixed media paper into these little cards and I just started. Some of them I already knew would work because I tried it before, so it was more to make a record of it. For instance, these Stabilo markers can be activated with water and blend beautifully with watercolor. The same goes for Tombos, by the way. So I just made these cards to remind myself of that. Or something else I like to do is use acrylic markers with water or watercolor. I'll show you a painting where I used this later. But some of the cards were also serious experimentation. I wanted to see what it would look like to add watercolor on top of acrylic paint, for instance. Now, obviously, acrylic paint is a type of plastic, so it leaves a shiny, water-resistant surface. Everything you don't want for watercolor, basically. But I thought this could be interesting. Would the watercolor pool in drops, or just in one place, or what would happen? So I tried it here, both with a thick layer of white acrylic paint and with a really thin layer. The result is surprising and also a bit disappointing in a way. Especially on the thin layer, the watercolor still covered everything basically, just in a kind of uneven way. But I prefer how it acted on this thicker layer, where it pooled in all the little grooves created by the uneven acrylic layer. The result was pretty similar for a glossy acrylic medium that I tried, which in a way is acrylic paint just without the pigment. I also experimented with ink, but these results were pretty disappointing. The white ink is an acrylic ink and the black one is a Winsor & Newton ink. I think it's Indian ink, but it doesn't say on the label, so I'm not totally sure. Anyway, I was hoping for some exciting textural effects, but as you can see, they basically just blended. Now to some of my favorites, to be expected, which were these ones here. I tried 3 different things here: gelatos, oil crayons, and water-soluble Neocolor tools. The texture of all of these is of course similar when you put them down on the page. And I think they all look stunning with watercolor. The only difference is this. The gelato can be a little bit activated when you really scrub it. The Pastels, which are real oil crayons, of course can't be, because they're all oily, waxy, and they resist the water fully. And the Neocolor tools are water soluble, so of course they can be fully dissolved, but here I wanted to try 2 other things. On the left side, I layered the watercolor very gently on top, and we see that it is only very slightly activated. And on the right side, I applied a bit more pressure, and of course it dissolved, but we can still see a few remnants of the original marks, which can also be very useful depending on your needs in a painting. Another favorite I have to show you is this acrylic ink test. In this case, I first put down an even wash of watercolor and then I dropped the pure, thick acrylic ink into it. And look at that! I love how it sort of pushes away the watercolor, but still integrates a bit of the pigment. This, I think, is definitely something to remember, something that will go in the library. A last favorite I'll show you is the glue stick. Now, this is a pretty recent discovery, something I learned from Victoria Semikina, my favorite illustrator. If you use a water-soluble glue stick and add watercolor, the two will mix and leave you with this sort of transparent paste that can make amazing brush textures. I immediately knew I had to use this in one of the daily paintings, and I'll show you. So here's an overview of all the textures I tried. You can pause if you want to study some of them more closely. But otherwise, let's get to the next section where I use some of these, as well as some other combos that you haven't seen yet in the actual paintings. As you know, the theme for week 4 of my challenge was unconventional mixed media. I really wanted to allow myself to break all the rules and really play and experiment. So let's take a look at what I did. Why not start with the glue stick technique I just showed you on the last test card we explored? I thought one great way to use this technique was for rugged mountains. So I was ecstatic when I saw the reference photos from Vietnam that were shared by Draw Daily Together. I started with a little watercolor wash of the sky and the water, and then I went in with the glue. You simply put it down in all the areas where you want the special texture, and then you add your watercolor. Now I would recommend not using your finest watercolor brush for this. Of course, this glue is water soluble, but it's probably still not great for your brush. So anyway, then you just use your brush to create whatever texture you desire. Here in the reference photo, I saw that the mountains had both vertical as well as horizontal lines. And so I tried to emulate that. I also used the back of the brush to scratch away some deeper lines. And I think it looks so cool. Most of the mountains were covered with bushes, so I added those as well as some foreground elements. You can see here that I used lots of mixed media, pencils, acrylic markers, Neocolor tools, all kinds of things. And for these nice white lines here at the end, I just used some of the white Posca with a fine brush. The reel in which I shared this on Instagram was seen by quite a few people, and I had a couple of comments of people saying that they had never seen this before. And it's true that, like I said, for me too, this is a new discovery. I've never seen anybody before using this. Have you ever tried this or seen this anywhere? I'm really so amazed with this technique, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. Another thing I wanted to try was to use charcoal in combination with watercolor. You might remember from my video about the different types of charcoal that I enjoyed the thick, strong lines you can make when you add charcoal on a wet surface. And in general, it's just such an amazing medium to use. In this case, I took inspiration from a great illustrator and artist who posts under the name Suhita Sketch on Instagram. She always uses strong black lines. I admire her trees, so I decided to do a painting inspired by her. So I started out with a charcoal sketch and then added watercolor. Maybe it would have been good to stop there, but in the moment I felt that there wasn't enough darkness. So I went back in with more charcoal, and I also mixed it a bit with the watercolor. I still quite like how this turned out. I think this combination of charcoal and watercolor could be a great choice for a moody painting where you don't want the colors to be too bright, but rather create a darker atmosphere. One of my favorite unusual combinations is to use acrylic markers and let them flow into wet areas of a painting. I'll show you this using the example of this painting I made of a cute alley in Brussels. Now I started with a sketch of these bikes. Now you'd think bikes are easy, but man, depending on the angle, they really aren't. But anyway, I added some of the houses, and then it was time for the greens. And I knew I wanted to use opaque acrylic markers for this. But I didn't want to have too hard edges. And to show the light, I also wanted them to not just be entirely one color and one value. So I first wet the page, which immediately lets the acrylic markers flow once you touch the page with them. But you can also see that I then went in quickly with the brush with yellow watercolor. And this helped to change the hue and the value on the edge of the plants, but also to soften the edges. I think it looks quite nice. And it can also create some nice textural effects when it's dry. I'll show you here. Now I want to share one more discovery I made that I'm really excited about, even if it's not strictly related to watercolor. One day I just wanted to make a super simple seascape and just focus on the colors and textures of the sky and the water. I had seen a seascape painting full of subtle colors that inspired me to do this. So I started with watercolor, of course, but I kept layering Neocolor 2s, which I also read at some point, and soft pastels in multiple layers, going back and forth. So in the end, there's probably no watercolor left that we can see. But this crazy mix of the waxy pastels with the super dry and dusty soft pastels created incredible effects that I really love. Here in the sky, we can see some sort of tiny flecks, where I guess some of the Neocolor stuck and got dried out with the soft pastels. I love this. And down here in the sea, we can see what happened when I dragged the soft pastels over a surface that was still moist from activating and mixing the Neocolor 2s. As soon as it happened, I thought, wow, this is the perfect texture for the ocean. So I quite like this little painting, but I'm even more excited about this little combo discovery, and I'll definitely try and refine it and use it again. I'll talk a bit about my watercolor palette now and sort of my review of what I think about it after having used it for 30 days straight. And after that, at the end of the video, I'll still reveal all of the remaining paintings we haven't seen yet. Well, as you know, this whole 30-day challenge started because I curated my dream palette of all my favorite colors, as well as must-haves for color mixing. I did do quite a bit of research before setting it up, but I'm not a watercolor artist, so I was still a bit unsure about some of the choices I made. I think overall I'm pretty happy. The most important thing for me is that I had all my favorite colors in one go-to palette, and I never felt the need to get out any of my other watercolor palettes. But I still have some critical remarks that I'll share with you in case you watched the initial video or you plan on curating your own dream palette. So this is what my palette looks like today, on the last day of the challenge. And I actually already had to refill a lot of these paints after about 10 days or so. We can see very clearly that I used some colors a lot more than others. The cold yellow, the warm yellow, and also the Payne's gray and the indigo are almost empty. I also really like the orange and the warm red. This quinacridone rose is not really a color I like on its own so much, and it's also quite transparent, but I still used it a lot for mixing. I also use this a lot as a basis for skin tones. Obviously you have to mix some other colors into it to get a natural looking skin tone, but you still need some kind of red, and I think ideally a cool red like this. These two browns here, well, the quinacridone sienna and the brown, I also used quite a bit. Definitely necessary. So which colors am I less sure about? I think this cobalt teal blue is a bit problematic. It's just very transparent. I mostly bought it to mix clear bright greens, but it's tough mixing with such a transparent pigment. All the greens I have on the other side are quite dark and muddy, so I suppose here I could maybe use something else to add to the palette. Because also this phthalo green blue shade didn't fully satisfy me. I just haven't used it as much as I thought. It's just too unnatural, I think, but I don't really know why I didn't use it more for mixing. Now the cobalt blue is really good for a natural looking sky when it's diluted. It's also relatively transparent. And all the other blues I really love. But do I really need all of them? Probably not, because I often use them together. The indigo, as well as the Payne's gray, I use as black, or to darken other colors, or just by themselves. And I already pointed out that I use these all the time. When it comes to all these granulating colors here on the left, well, let's start at the top. I don't really love the Tundra Orange or the Galaxy Brown because they're both really transparent. I really love this Forest Blue, but this is the last bit I have of this paint, so I was a bit precious with it. And all these greens are quite similar, to be fair. So I kind of use them together and interchangeably. So I probably don't really need all of them. 1 or maybe 2 would be enough. And this Galaxy Black and Galaxy Violet are really beautiful, but I didn't use them much. But for those, I think that the problem was more that these colors don't fit very well with the subjects I paint. So overall, I'd say that I could take out some of the colors and instead give others double the space, so use a full pen. And I could also imagine replacing a few colors with some half pans of gouache and seeing what that would do to my painting process and style. Maybe this would help me feel more comfortable using only this palette instead of adding other materials on top of watercolor. I guess my style is just not very delicate or transparent, and therefore I prefer stronger colors. But as I said, overall I'm still happy with this, and for now I'll keep it as it is. Okay, so now I'll reveal the remaining paintings I haven't shown you yet. If you want to know more about these, be sure to check my Instagram, follow me there under Hues and Reveries. And this is also where you can watch all the daily process reels. Or leave a comment here with any questions, comment or feedback you might have. Alright, now I think I've shown you lots of the paintings I made already and many mixed media combinations. Plenty of food for thought. And hopefully for experimenting. What combo did you like the most? Are there any that you will try? Let me know in the comments. I'm super curious to know what you think. So that's all for my challenge, you guys. I can't believe I did it. It wasn't always easy, but I pushed through and I'm proud of it. Now I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who followed me on this 30-day journey and all my old and new subscribers. Every single comment and like of you means the world to me as I grow this little baby channel. Now I'm happy that I get to create again without any limitations, using whatever material I want. That also means I can be repetitive if I want, and I don't have to come up with some new exciting combination every single day. Anyway, I hope to see you next week. Thanks for spending this time with me. I hope it inspires you to play with your own supplies in new ways. Stay creative and take care.